Thank you. This is a tough topic to handle because I don't have data. I just have concepts. And defining a culture of excellence can be a challenge because in some ways I'm going to be talking platitudes rather than, hard information. But I think the one thing I would maybe emphasize at the outset is that it's not enough to create a culture of excellence. It's cultivating that culture of excellence. It's not something that you set and forget, but it's a continuous process of maintaining the quality and the excellence of what a system can offer and how we can make it better. I want to acknowledge to begin with that the whole concept of pre-hospital care was a vision. It was a vision in Seattle, King County that began as an experiment. And in 1968, Gordon Vickery, who was fire chief of the Seattle Fire Department, and Drs. Leonard Cobb and Kopis realized that providing on-scene care to heart attack victims was an important concept, but it was experimental. No one had really done this in the U.S., and so they secured funding from the U.S. government for firefighter paramedic training, and they launched Medic One. This was the first medic vehicle. It was called affectionately Moby Pig, and notably during the first year of Medic One's operation, 31 lives were saved as a result of this effort. In 1972, a law was passed that allowed paramedics to operate independently of an on-scene physician. So this took medical control away from the rigs and more remotely, and allowed paramedics to function independently. And in 1981, we instituted telecommunicator CPR. These were all visionary concepts, if you think about it. Taking care to patients before hospitalization provided by non-physicians, and then instituting therapies like CPR remotely by telecommunicators. Part of that culture of excellence was saying if you're going to do something like this, you need to train your providers to the highest level that is possible to train. And that becomes part of a culture of excellence, training providers to provide high-quality care. In Seattle, King County, that means our fire department has a base curriculum that has oversight by medical program directors, but we're particularly vigorous in our paramedic training program. That involves 10 months of training curriculum, 100 hours of biannual CME, web-based interactive CME, and periodic skills level testing. And I might say that even if an experienced paramedic comes to apply for a job in Seattle, King County and has had years of experience elsewhere, they're still required to go through a 10-month training curriculum, 7 days out of the week, often 24/7 during those days. That's an absolute requirement because we want to make sure training in our system is up to our standards, and that's part of the vision, I think, that our Medic One leadership had. A culture of excellence, I think, also involves glue that holds everything together. And I think where we've been fortunate is that means medical leadership needs to be experienced and they need to be involved in what's going on. A distant medical director is probably worthless. If the troops don't know who they are and they don't know who the troops are, the glue no longer serves as glue, and as a result, the function of the system becomes compromised. Priorities are also important. When I get back to Seattle, I'll be meeting with the newly graduated paramedic students and talk to them a little about the priorities in our organization. And here are the priorities that I really share. It's patients first and always first, meaning when you ask what to do, the answer is what was best for that patient. The second is the organization, maintaining the credibility of King County Medic One, saying what you do reflects on this organization and everyone in this organization. That means your performance has to be up to the standards of what our organization is. And third is the individual, meaning we care about the care provider. We want to make sure we're compassionate, understanding, that we promote their success in the field. But when it comes down to brass tacks, those are the priorities. It's always going to be the patient first. The organization doesn't come first, the patient does. The individual doesn't come first, the patient and the organization do. And I think keeping those priorities straight tends to work very well, because when there are conflicts between the individual and the organization, you simply say, Joe, what was best for the patient? And the answer is, that's the right thing to always do. Another key piece, I think, of a culture of excellence is there's many things that we can focus on in an EMS system. And focus becomes important because it helps direct your priorities in terms of what business as usual should really be. So here's the question. Cardiac arrest accounts for what percentage of all EMS calls? 1%, 2%, 5%, 10%. Anybody want to hazard a guess at that? I see a few hands. I'll give you the answer for sake of time. 1%. The question is, why are we here today? We're talking about cardiac arrest and better management of cardiac arrest, and yet it accounts for only 1% of all EMS calls. So why are we focused on cardiac arrest? And the answer to that, and again, it's part of the vision I think that the leadership of Seattle-King County had, is that it becomes a metric to really assess an overall system's performance. Now, why is it a metric? Because of all the illnesses we encounter, it's the most time-critical and time-dependent. And it includes a lot of features that overlap with other illnesses. You need to have rapid dispatch, and it focuses on EMS skills. What skills, what treatments, what interventions are provided, and what's the level of that skill provider who does that. It involves teamwork. You know, paramedics are teamed, EMS are teamed, and it involves looking at how well that team functions, not only on scene, but in planning their strategy before getting there. You have to coordinate with other stakeholders, right? With hospitals, with other involved people. It's measurable. We know what time is involved in assessing cardiac arrest. We know what outcome is with cardiac arrest. And maybe here's the most important piece. It's transferable, meaning if we do a good job of managing cardiac arrest, all of these principles apply to any other illness that we deal with. Trauma, STEMI, stroke, you name it, all of these apply. So keeping the focus on cardiac arrest is not a bad approach. Now, you may take a different focus, maybe STEMI, maybe stroke, maybe other things, but we chose to focus on cardiac arrest and make that our measurable parameter, and everything seems to follow suit as a result of that. Next principle is quality improvement, but I always add the descriptor, it has to be perpetual. You don't just measure quality and stop, you keep going forward. The adage is measure and improve. Let me give you one example of that and how having a registry and having the attitude of measuring and improving can really make a difference. Here are data looking at a time period from 1975 to 1993 when we began equipping our firefighters with automatic external defibrillators. And you can see from the early 1980s to the 1990s, virtually 100% of our first responders had AEDs. And we therefore said we expect survival should be better as a result of a higher proportion of EMS providers having and using AEDs. So we looked at survival, and that's in the yellow line. This is survival over the same time course that we tracked as we had more and more firefighters and first responders providing AEDs on scene. And what did we see? If anything, we saw a decline in survival, not improvement. And we looked back and said, well, why might that be? Well, here are the standing orders that existed between 1990 and 1993 when 100% of first responders had AEDs. It was application of the AED is to have the highest priority in treating a patient with cardiac arrest. And we looked at that and we looked at these data and we said, maybe that's the wrong standing order. Maybe we're giving orders to push buttons instead of administering care. So in 1994, we changed standing orders, and here's what they said. The highest priority is not the AED. The highest priority is CPR. You will begin chest compressions immediately, and you'll do it for 90 seconds before you analyze for the first shock. We then looked back at outcome. What happened during the period of 1990 to 1993 when shock was the highest priority? Survival to hospital discharge in 1,000 patients with VF was 24%. When we realized that wasn't improving survival and we changed priority to emphasize CPR, survival improved to nearly 30%, or a 22% improved survival. That would not have happened without a registry, without seeing what was happening, without changing the protocol, remeasuring, improving, and going forward. This was not a randomized trial. This was simply quality improvement, measure and improve and go forward. Well, what's another potential element of a culture of excellence? It's teamwork. And teamwork, if I could say, doesn't automatically happen. It's something that you really have to engage and create. And I think one of the keys to success in that kind of teamwork is that we debrief and provide feedback as frequently as we can for cardiac arrest occurrences. This picture I think I showed you yesterday is really depicting World War II fighter pilots coming back after a bombing run and grouping together and discussing what went right and what went wrong on the missions. And we endeavor to do the same thing. Whoops. Frank, I may need your help here. Oh, thank you. We endeavor to try to do the same thing in terms of our feedback to providers. You know what, let's just skip that one, Frank. Yep, okay, perfect, thank you. By providing numerical information as to their performance during CPR, so these are measures that are taken from a downloaded and reviewed resuscitation. But more importantly, we also provide access to the actual resuscitation itself with voice. So the providers can look at their own resuscitations. We will often provide physician annotations on these reports so that they can look at a physician note and also look at their own provision of care. And this becomes a huge way of getting teamwork because they realize we're involved as leadership with them, and they in turn can see their performance, and that builds a team that really is constructed from the bottom up and from the top down. Part of that is also recognition. When our medics do well, we do our best to get that word back to them. And when someone has had a number of saves in a given time period, there's an award that they get for how many lives they were responsible for in getting a patient saved from the field and discharged from the hospital. That builds teamwork because the medics realize they're not only being observed to improve their care, but they're recognized for the work that they provide. Culture of excellence also means building meaningful relationships. Part of that is just basic human interaction. Foster good rapport. And if I could say this, where I think a lot of systems have a challenge there is the rapport with dispatch. Remember, dispatch are really the true first providers of care, and yet often we don't communicate very much with dispatch to tell them how well they've done and when a life has been saved. And getting that buy-in and bringing dispatch into the team can have a huge impact on our success in saving lives. It involves rapport with providers, with hospitals, with communities, and it's looking for any opportunity to engage others. If I were to put it in a simple line, it's the medical directors that say, I'm interested and I'm available. And if you provide that kind of attitude, teamwork just happens and it ends up being fostered. Accountability. This is a tough one because accountability often is just geared toward the providers themselves, saying, you know, they're accountable for the work that they do. But as this is President Truman, and he had a sign on his desk that basically said, the buck stops here. And I think accountability is not just medical leadership and providers, but it's all of us together saying the buck really stops here. The provider in the field takes the responsibility for what they do. Medical leadership takes responsibility for what they do, and we share that responsibility rather than pointing the finger at an individual that's saying, well, it was that person that was responsible for this problem. It's my problem, the buck stops here, and if we have that kind of attitude, it fosters that attitude in others because everyone takes ownership for what they potentially do. Perseverance. No system is perfect, ours certainly is not. And we've got more bent nails in our board than we've got straight ones. But perseverance means you keep pressing on to do better. This is Thomas Edison, who you're familiar with the fact he invented the light bulb, but Thomas Edison had a very famous quotation. He said, I never failed, it was just a 2,500 step process. And I think that can be our attitude too in our EMS endeavors. We don't fail, we take it one step at a time, and ultimately we reach our goal if our goal is to save lives and to make our systems function better. Let me say finally, a culture of excellence is fostering a legacy. And people like Tom Ray and Michael Sayer and myself really can't take credit for where we stand in an organization, because we really stand on the head and shoulders of those who preceded us. And the greatest danger I think we can run into as medical leaders is to forget the fact that we have to create a legacy. A system can't stop functioning because a medical director passes away or moves on to other things. We need to be aware of training the leadership that's going to come after us in all the capacities of our work. That's at the field level, and that's at the leadership level. And if we fail to do that, the system dies when I die. And that's wrong. The system's success means it goes on despite whether I'm part of that system or not part of that system. So, culture of excellence, what is it? What's the secret sauce? What's the glue? What's the pixie dust? A tough question to answer, but let me just have Dr. Michael Kopis give you his perspective just as the final thoughts of what he views as a culture of excellence.
Well, culture of excellence is one of those phrases that gets overworked by Madison Avenue types. And culture of excellence is, to my way of thinking, the Green Bay Packers in 1964-65, when the team wasn't filled with superstars. Maybe there was a guy from Notre Dame who was good, but Bart Starr wasn't all that great, and the pass catchers weren't good, but they played together in such a fashion that they never expected to lose. And there was a concept that one of them, and I think it was Thurston, said, we didn't lose the game, we just ran out of time. And my bias about measuring a program and looking at a program and working in a program is that there should be a rule that you obey every day when you go to work, and that is nobody dies in my rig. Nobody dies under my care. I will aim as high as I possibly can to make sure that this individual's life is guaranteed. And when you do that, you work hard to gather skills and style and habits that propitiate success and effectiveness. And it could be that it's a culture, but it's a behavior, it's a willingness to give of yourself so that everybody in the group, including the patient, does extremely well. And when you look back on good athletic teams and when you look back on good medical teams, you think about the medical team that was collected at Baylor and the phenomenal activities of the heart surgery program. It's because everybody contributed and played over their head. Way over their head, and then finally discovered that they could play over their head and set the bar up and played over their head again. So the culture of excellence is pursuing high standards, and every time you reach your standard, set the bar higher. Every time you achieve success in the measurement of a difficult piece of music, then set the bar higher, either more difficult music or faster or better or whatever. But the rule needs to be that I don't take humans for granted, and I will work over my head, beyond my capability that I see it, to achieve success.
If I were to put it in one sum statement, and Aristotle said it pretty well, we are what we repeatedly do, therefore excellence isn't an act, but it's a habit. There you have the culture of excellence. Thanks for your attention.